It's the week ending Saturday, the 5th of November, and remember, this is the week unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Lula da Silva winning Brazil's presidential election with a vote of 50.9%, poultry farms in Europe facing lockdowns as bird flu cases grow, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak changing his mind, confirming he will now attend COP27. You can read more about all of that in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from The Week magazine is Leif Arbuthnot. From daily podcast Today in History with the Retrospectors, it's Arion McNicoll. And fresh from passing her 3-show probation period, it's book reviews editor for the International Affairs Journal, Mariana Vieira. Mariana, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Did the US break South Africa's trust for good?
A few years back, there was I guess more rumors like this about the attack, and nothing really happened. So I guess it's more just to scare people. I think maybe government, just to get people scared and worried that threats like this could actually happen. But yet again, it's like a topic of they want to bomb because of pride, which has always been a topic people have struggled with to accept. So I don't know. I think it's just maybe just a hate crime against South Africa, against anyone. Maybe not supporting the LGBTQ. That's what I think.
Sarah Bruni, a member of the public from Sandton, South Africa, speaking to South African news channel News 24 late last week. Mariana, what was she talking about and what's happened this week?
So on Sunday, various sources pointed to the gathering storm between South Africa and the United States after the US Embassy issued a vague terror alert for a potential terror attack on the Sandton district of Johannesburg over the weekend.
Yeah, so this was during a Pride March, wasn't it?
I mean, it was a particularly busy weekend for the city with several events scheduled to take place, including, as you said, Olly, the Pride March parade on Saturday, which actually ended up going ahead, gathering thousands of people with heightened security measures.
So the US issued a threat, but the South African officials didn't?
The U.S. Embassy issued a warning that a terrorist attack might happen in what it's deemed Africa's richest square mile, broadly mentioning that it would target large gatherings. They advised people to avoid public large gatherings over the weekend, but they did not specify what was being targeted or how the attack might happen. And as a response to this, President Cyril Ramaphosa responded to the alert by calling it quite unfortunate, and the authorities said that they had no evidence of any imminent attack.
Yeah, quite unfortunate sounds like an understatement, Arion, if you're running a nation that has many problems, especially with crime, and, this is the first Pride March they've organised since COVID as well. To then have an intervention from a foreign power saying your streets aren't safe but with no qualification must have been pretty upsetting.
That's it, yeah. And I read some commentary from South African papers, and they were saying, broadly, for a security threat warning to be useful, it should identify a few things. For example, the attackers behind the threat, the ideology and the motivation for the planned attack, the method that they're going to be using to do their terrorist action. So all of these things would be useful if you were actually trying to warn people of something that was imminently going to happen. And none of them were supplied. Equally, I think, the other reason that Ramaphosa was so upset was that he said, describing this thing as unfortunate was, as you say, an understatement, because they hadn't taken the time to alert, it seems, South African security forces who, after all, are responsible for protecting everyone within South Africa, including, according to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, foreign diplomatic missions within their country. So if there was a threat against the US Embassy itself, let alone the people of South Africa, then the US should have been telling, the security forces first and then maybe coming to their own diplomatic mission second. Of course, in practice, that's easy to say, but at least you would think that you'd be looped in with the government in question of the country you're warning.
Yeah, and of course, Leif, that's been a popular view across South Africa this week as the news stations there have covered this story. But the argument that, this Pride March proceeded without a hitch, the US was wrong, there was not a problem, that is also hard to evidence, isn't it? Because we don't have a counterfactual. Maybe a terror plot was changed because the US issued this warning. and they did the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's one of those situations where if we knew exactly what intelligence the kind of US was going on, the kind of lines in this would be much clearer. I think it's a question of pride, really. You know, South Africa doesn't want to look like it doesn't have things in order. And obviously the US has got a bit of a reputation for very good reasons for sort of throwing its weight around and being quite frankly judgy of things outside its own borders, when in fact in the US itself, you know, you could say that you'd be pretty at risk of all sorts of unpleasant endings.
Yeah, could be at risk in an elementary school.
Yeah, exactly. In an elementary school, or, you know, as a poor black person, you could be at risk of, arrest from without reason from racist police officers. And there are all sorts of ways in which the US doesn't have its own house in order. So I think this is kind of scratching at that itch, which a lot of countries feel, which is that the US is super arrogant and likes to sort of be stressy about other countries without actually acknowledging its own flaws.
But then you have to look after your own citizens too, don't you, Mariana? And, you know, I looked up what the UK government advice was on South Africa, for example, and here it says terrorists are very likely to carry out attacks in South Africa. I mean, if there is intelligence of that, then it is responsible for a country to alert its citizens that that's a possibility when they're traveling to that country.
I think you're right. And also one of the most well-connected terrorist experts in the country, Jasmine Opperman, says that at the end of the day, the terror alert served its purpose of heightening vigilance, regardless of what ended up happening. The question about terrorism within South Africa has been quite a contentious one for some time, whether there are actually links within the country to ISIS. Curiously enough, the US puts together a counterterrorism report on South Africa and other countries every year. And it's actually been moving towards a positive note from 2018 to 2020, only now highlighting that there are heightened dangers in terms of the insurgency in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, that's been going on, and that ISIS has claimed some responsibility. And so the US has been, since I think 2018, doubled down on their efforts to target potential sleeper cells within South Africa. And they even imposed sanctions on 4 alleged ISIS organizers and financiers within South Africa. So it is a threat that they've been keeping an eye on for a while now.
Okay. I mean, on the question of the diplomatic relationship between South Africa and the USA, Arion, do you accept the thesis that this has put some strain on that?
I think that's right. And I think that overwhelmingly, this looks like an indication of yet further deteriorating relations between the US and South Africa. You know, South Africa has, for example, recently steadfastly refused to join in the US-led anti-Russian economic sanctions since they were imposed in February when the Ukraine war broke out. And the events of this week kind of reveal that this is just going further. You know, President Ramaphosa was involved in a state visit to the US in September that was disrupted rather suddenly by the death of the Queen, and both presidents had to then hastily rearrange their diaries and make their way to the UK for the Queen's funeral. But, you know, they were trying to find a way through the fact that for a long time, the relationship between South Africa and the US has been suffering from this complex history, not least because over several years, various US governments designated the African National Congress as terrorists, the people who were fighting against the old apartheid regime. Plus, there's the memory of the CIA's rather unsavory role across Africa more broadly. So, you know, this is yet more evidence of the fact that there's just this sort of tension between the two countries that needs a bit of resolution.
Yes, but if we're talking about kind of tectonic plates shifting, Leif, in the sort of context of the relationship between South Africa and America, I mean, within my lifetime, you had apartheid and the bitter divides over that. I mean, we're still a long way from that kind of conflict, aren't we?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think it's important not to big this up too much. I think it's an interesting snapshot of, you know, where things can go wrong between countries. But you're absolutely right to say that on a kind of broader scheme, this isn't, you know, relations could be a good deal worse. I think that Biden seems to be trying to repair some of the damage made by Trump when he was sometimes a little bit rude about South Africa. So, you know, I think that this is it probably counts as a bit of a bruising sort of encounter between the two countries rather than anything too serious.
Nonetheless, I mean, that's true, isn't it, Mariana, that whoever's in charge in South Africa probably doesn't want Trump back.
I do not have a direct line to Cyril to ask this. But I think what this episode really highlights is that there is a lack of credibility on the law enforcement and counterterrorism machinery within South Africa. And this has been something that has been going on, especially since the complete intelligence breakdown last year during the July 2021 riots. And there's been deep suspicions of South Africa's local intelligence agencies. And also, I didn't know this before. I looked into this a bit more. And one of the sources of tensions has a lot to do with the former intelligence chief, who is one of the main pressure points right now on the current president, pushing him to step down. So it's almost like this US terror alert is going to have potentially a ripple effect within South Africa's politics.
And bit of context, I mean, maybe relevant, maybe not. There were Ethiopian peace talks going on in South Africa this week too, right?
That's correct. They were going over, so they were very silent about what was being talked about. They were taking place over the weekend. They were extended to Monday. Just on Thursday, they announced that they were able to broker a peace deal. So after 2 years of conflict, so it's quite unprecedented, although it was taking place in a different city, but it did lead to a lot of speculation.
And just another bit of context, the warning came quite hot on the heels of another US terror threat warning, but this time in Nigeria. And I think that part of the reason that the warning in South Africa was unexpected was that Nigeria is a place where its own troops are fighting jihadist insurgents, mostly in the northeast, and there haven't been any actual attacks on the capital since 2014. But it's believable. In Nigeria, it is believable that there could be some sort of terrorist action. Whereas I think the thing that was so surprising about the warning in South Africa was that there didn't seem to be any indication that something was brewing, the major event that was going on, apart from those Ethiopian peace talks, was this Pride parade, and then nothing happened. So I think that people have just been a bit baffled by it and slightly scratching their heads over quite what the US was hoping to achieve.
I'm quite interested as well in the fact that South Africa and the UK are given the same sort of level in the way that the US informs its citizens about the kind of dangers of traveling there. So Nigeria is given level 3, and the US says to its citizens that they should reconsider travel, whereas the UK and South Africa are on level 2, and the advice for that is exercise increased caution. And I think that makes sense, but it is quite sort of funny that the UK is on a level 2 setting, and the idea that, US tourists should come to London and sort of be, super vigilant as they're walking down Oxford Street.
Well, except, you look at recent history, and if you're a tourist in a capital city, I suppose France is slightly worse than the UK. But if you're looking at Western Europe, you are more likely to be involved in a terror attack here than you are back home.
Yeah, but it's a question of scale. These things are so rare. Obviously, we've had some horrific, terrorist attacks in the UK and France, but they have been statistically extremely, they've affected a tiny number of people, thank goodness. And the chances of this actually impacting, US tourists is minuscule. You'd be much more likely to be run over. So, I can understand where the embassy is coming from. They want to cover all their bases, but it does seem a little bit strange and that it might sow kind of fear where it doesn't need to be sown.
Or does it, Mariana, just flag up uncomfortable truths for countries that think they have a good relationship with the United States when they're, whatever you think of them, quite sophisticated services conclude that there's a threat? That's why it's taken seriously, isn't it? It's because the US are quite good at this sort of thing usually.
I think also because I wanted to question and push back on whether it should be taken seriously, because the idea of a terrorist threat, there's two types of, I would say, like, there's two types of countries when it comes to the terrorist spectrum. And I would say something like, there are the countries who are targets, and then there are the countries who are sort of financing something. And along this spectrum, I was talking to one of our Chatham House experts about this, because he works just on South Africa. And all the information that comes out about the terrorist threat within South Africa is not whether it will be attacked, but it's how much it's financing either ISIS fighters in Syria. The passports apparently are super easy to get for South African passports to then travel up to Syria. It's about how they're financing or potentially financing the insurgency in Mozambique. So it would be almost ironic or a bad judgment on the part of the terrorists to sort of attack the country that's sort of funding them in a way that the UK I don't know, perhaps it's not.
Okay, I think we'll leave that there, but a fascinating story. Thank you. Arion, I'm coming to you next after this. Okay, Arion, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, we discovered that if you want to see Adele, well, hello, someone like you will just be chasing pavements.
Hi, listen, I'm so sorry, but my show ain't ready.
Adele's teary Instagram post announcing the cancellation of her Las Vegas residency back in January. And this week, Arion, some more bad news for her fans who want a ticket to these shows that are finally going ahead.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the good news is that it's back on. But as you say, the bad news is that tickets, if you want to go see it and you don't already have one, have now climbed to absolute record levels. So according to some reports that I read, they've reached as high as £200,000 each. I actually, this is in resale, by the way. So they were sold for less extortionate prices originally, but they've now reached that sort of level, at least according to the Mail on Sunday.
Okay, how does that possibly make sense? You know, if you could buy Adele's house for the cost of 5 tickets to her show, how does that make sense?
I doubt you could buy her house for that sort of money. But
all right, you could buy her car for the cost of a ticket to her show. So what's going on?
I guess you'd want to really, really see Adele, and rather than drive her car, that would be the reason why you'd pay that sort of money. There is actually something going on beneath it, at least according to the sort of people who specialize in the reasoning behind why ticket touts are putting tickets online for these sorts of extortionate prices. Some say that it's a thing called speculative trading. Often the touts don't actually own the tickets yet. They put up a price for a ticket, and then as soon as a buyer comes along, then they go, okay, well, I will now do everything in my power up to and including hitting that particular price point to get that ticket, and anything that they pay under that amount is therefore profit to them.
Okay, so that's a new thing, isn't it, Leaf? Because, you know, you think about ticket touts, and I mean, if you're my age anyway, you think about guys standing outside the venue, often selling them actually, if you get there after the show started, for less than face value. Like they've made a punt, haven't they? They've got the ticket in hand and they're trying to get the most they can. But we're talking now about scalpers, they call them in North America, don't they? Who actually don't even have the ticket in hand when they're charging you $40,000 for it.
I know it's quite crazy, and it seems that sometimes these prices are just are sort of floated as a way of bumping up prices generally. So if you see say like a £40,000 ticket, you might think, oh God, well my £10,000 ticket seems really good value, I better buy it. So, and you know, I can imagine lots of you know, sort of billionaires being like, yeah, 240K for an Adele ticket, or for a clutch of Adele tickets, why not? But it's also, it seems to be, according to the to people who know more about this stuff, a sort of vibe thing. Like if you bump up the vibe of a price, then that's useful. I'm quite interested in the fact that this seems a little bit different in the US versus the UK and other parts of Europe. So in the UK, it's not illegal to resell live music tickets for profit, but it is illegal to use automated software to sort of bulk buy tickets for commercial gain, because the internet has been the thing that's really sent touting supernova. Sometimes these bots can be used to kind of, you know, sweep up all these tickets as soon as they come online. But in some cases, like in some countries like France and Norway, the reselling of live music tickets for profit is actually against the law. So, I mean, we're all kind of gearing up to Glastonbury, or at least the country is. The tickets are going on sale this weekend.
It's November.
I know, but the tickets are going on sale this weekend. And I'm Glastonbury's organisers have put in a massive amount of effort to try to stop the tickets from being sold online at massive markups, which I think is pretty good news for the music industry.
Yeah, you have to upload your ID and stuff, don't you? I mean, Mariana, from an international affairs point of view, that's maybe the angle here that's interesting, isn't it? Here in the UK and in Europe, and Glastonbury's a great example because, you know, they're all about social justice and lefty causes and stuff. They're going out of their way to make sure that the face value is the value. Whereas in America, is it just capitalism run riot? Is it a political choice? It's just like, well, that's the market. If people are prepared to pay $200,000 on a resale ticket, why should we stop that? What's wrong with that?
I really think it is wrong, but just got that out, and I'm going to try and start without being too riled up. So I feel like, so yes, in the US, things are different, and ticket touting is rife. But also, I was shocked to hear that the average price for a popular concert has more than tripled since the mid 90s. And this has not only vastly outpaced inflation, but this is the price before the resale market, which I can even bear to fathom. And I think there has been some investigations back in 2020 from the Justice Department into Ticketmaster, one of the main platforms for reselling tickets. And they were actually
the highly litigious ticket selling platform. What are you about to say?
Just that there was
they've dabbled in the resale market themselves, haven't they? Is that what you were about to say?
I was going to say that they have the Justice Department's put out a memo saying that they have found that Ticketmaster is or has been strong arming venues into using their platform, or retaliated against platforms that haven't used their services. And they were also found to be holding back the vast majority of tickets from the general public for the resale market.
So it's sort of market manipulation, basically.
Basically,
but to my question, is that just an endemic cultural thing in the States? It's a choice. It's not a problem from their point of view.
I think so.
Whereas in Europe, it's something we see with great suspicion.
But I also think that there is debate not just in the US, but also in the EU as to whether this is a product of free market capitalism and consumerism culture. And I think even in the EU, there's still so much that can be done. I was reading about how this umbrella pressure group called the Face Value of European Alliance for Ticketing is actually, they're doing more than the US, obviously, because they're fighting for against the resale market because it supports tax evasion. And overall, the EU countries are missing out on considerable tax revenues due to their activities. So I wonder if this is a line that you could use in the US. I feel like if you go through the profit venue, maybe you will get people to have a bit more action.
There's also a charity in the UK called Fanfare Alliance that kind of tries to fight ticket touting. And it's done some research, and I know that it's probably quite biased research, but I think it seems to make intuitive sense that if music fans are buying inflated tickets, say, usually, you'd spend maybe 20 quid or 25 quid on a gig, but then because you're buying it from a tout, it might be, double that or triple that. They're less likely, according to the research, to go and see another concert, soon after that, because, basically we all have budgets that we're working towards and we don't want to spend too much money. And so the idea is that these ticket touts are actually, materially damaging the music industry because they're stopping people from being able to afford, multiple trips to go and see live music. And I think that that's basically right. If I've spent loads of money on a ticket, then I'm not going to, get one the next week. So I'm basically pro all the people who are trying to stop this from happening. Although, we've all been in a situation where you thought you'd be able to make a concert and then you can't. And it would be annoying if somehow that was reselling your ticket was made extremely difficult.
And also, Arion, the other argument is, because you hear artists, don't you, saying the only money that comes from ticket sales should be going to support the artists and the venue. But they are getting the face value. They set the price. They're still getting the same value that they've decided is appropriate for their services at a sold-out gig. Everything else is the market intervening. It's not like they would be getting that money unless they'd set their prices arguably more appropriately for the market in the first place. It's a market failure on their part.
That's true. And there was an interesting case in September when Harry Styles' 2023 tour made the headlines after fans started paying more than the initial price of the ticket to the official vendor. And what was going on was that they'd instituted this ticket pricing method that was known as dynamic or surge pricing, which is like Uber's surge mode, where basically the more interest there is in a gig, the more the initial vendor would charge for the tickets. And the logic that they were deploying was they said that it would deter secondary resale ticket scalping or ticket touting, because the touts would be scared off because the tickets would hit the maximum price that fans would be willing to pay for them, which seems a sort of perverse argument in that who it serves is the artist and the ticket vendor and the venue, that's for sure. But it also really does.
But also, if you're using mum and dad's credit card to go and see Harry Styles, it's a bit of an unfair test case, isn't it?
And also, I suppose that, that question of whether you're damaging your own fans' ability to continue to go see other live music, either your concerts or someone else's. If you price people to the absolute maximum that they're willing to pay, then, they may end up seeing you and no one else. And I do think that it's not going to solve that core problem of, even after you've reached the maximum that people are going to pay for tickets in the first instance, they're still going to be bought by people who are going to try and sell them on. So I just think it's fallacious to even come at the problem in that way.
Do you think it could damage Adele, Leaf? Because, she's such a divisive figure now, isn't she? Not actually because of anything intrinsic, just because she's so popular that anything about her online sort of divides people.
I would say there's probably, briefly on Adele, I would say there's probably a kind of slightly weird fringe of Adele haters who are annoyed that she's cancelled all of her tours and that she's a bit of a diva. But that basically she's a national treasure. I think it might damage Adele a bit in the sense that it'll make her seem even more like a kind of lofty woman who's gone to LA and become like a global superstar and isn't the sort of sweetheart from London that we all fell in love with 10 or 15 years ago. But no, I don't really think that this is going to have a massive impact on Adele's reputation. She's got a rock solid reputation and people love her and will continue to love her. And also the point is that only weird people will want to spend £40,000 on a ticket to go and see one of her concerts. So the rest of us won't care.
Well, yeah, also in Vegas, Arion, it's the other bit that I don't understand. Surely if you have $40,000 to spend on a ticket to Adele, Caesar's Palace would give it to you anyway. Like, their business model isn't about making profit on the show, is it? Like, they want you to go and spend money in the casino. I don't even really understand who these people are that would be using a web. If you've got that kind of money, you wouldn't be on the website. You'd own the hotel.
Well, yeah, I think there's something in that. I think also the nature of the delay to her show, as we heard from Adele at the top there, she was saying that she felt like the show wasn't ready. It wasn't like artistically what she wanted to produce. And the way that she's changed the show is
it's making it smaller.
Yeah, she's made it smaller and more intimate.
What we need for $10,000 tickets is fewer people on stage and less spectacle.
I sort of thought that would make you feel even more upset at having paid that kind of price, given that now, her initial plan to have an orchestra on stage. Now there's not going to be an orchestra. It's really just Adele. You're just in a room with Adele. I mean, maybe people would pay more money for that.
I would like to respectfully disagree in the sense that what really appeals to me is the idea of Adele kind of it feeling like a personal and quite intimate performance. Adele has a gorgeous voice and she's got a sort of lovely personality. She's also very, she gets very nervous about performing. So I would way prefer to see her in a sort of small venue with like 300 people than in a massive sort of 40,000 style, big concert.
I take your point, but you're not getting a smaller room. You're getting the same massive room complete with nosebleed seats. It's just that you're now paying like tens of thousands of pounds for the privilege.
Yeah, I take that.
And can I just recommend, if you are there and you don't get a ticket for Adele, ticket for Barry Manilow up the road, probably $60. Best show I've ever seen. Okay, Leaf, you're up next after this. Okay, Leaf, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
A glorified portmanteau.
Ongoing feeling that, that we are in an extended period of, instability, insecurity, anxiety, because it's one catastrophic event after another. So it's something that describes an unrelenting situation, I think, which, I think feels probably quite apt.
Now, there's a national sweetheart for you. Countdown Susie Dent, describing the word of the year on BBC Breakfast on Wednesday. Leaf, what is that word?
The word is permacrisis.
Permacrisis.
Yeah, permacrisis, but all one word. There's no hyphen in the middle. And it describes an extended period of instability and security. And it's been named by Collins Dictionary as the word of the year for 2022. The Collins people said that it seemed appropriate because it summarised quite how awful 2022 has been for so many people. And it does remind me actually of another similar word that was chosen as Word of the Year by the OED in as far back as 2012, and that was omnishambles. And I think permacrisis is in a similar sort of family to the word omnishambles.
Yes, except the difference is, I mean, I don't know if you agree with me, I sort of remember omnishambles being said. I mean, albeit only really by the Twitterati, but nonetheless it was being circulated in 2012. I'd literally never heard the word permacrisis until Collins just announced it as their word of the year. Surely to be word of the year, it has to be one that at least the general public would recognise.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You could accuse the Collins lexicographers and team of freelancing a bit here, maybe getting a bit above their station. I have seen it in use, but then I do, as the assistant editor at The Week, spend a lot of my time scouring the newspapers. And so this is quite a journalism-ese type word.
Is it? So is it like in opinion columns and stuff?
Yeah, people will say not that often, but we've entered the era of the permacrisis. We just buffeted from one crisis to another. I mean, really zooming out a bit, there's an argument to be made that actually most periods in human history have been sort of permacrises for lots of different groups. And it's maybe reflects a degree of kind of self-absorption that, when war comes to Europe, suddenly, we think, oh my God, that this is the kind of an era of the permacrisis, whereas, in some countries that have been dealing with problems, at their borders and inside their own countries, it's probably felt like that for a very long time.
There's this strange thing, isn't there, Mariana, of on the one hand, obviously, all of these dictionaries, this is their annual press release. This is the thing where every year they finally get written about as if it's still relevant, the publication of a dictionary. So they have to seize that opportunity with both hands. But on the other hand, maybe just flirting a little too hard with some of those keywords, choosing words they know are going to get them coverage because it seems to say something about the political situation, rather than their actual role as dictionaries, as Johnsonian tomes, to tell us about the words that are in circulation.
I get your point about calling out to the more newsworthy announcements. I don't know if you saw that in 2015 they announced the crying with tears emoji as their word of the year. So it was the first emoji to be selected. But also on the point of choosing words that are political. First of all, I think I was living under a rock because I didn't know this was a thing where you choose words of the year. And so it made me really curious about what happens in Portugal, where I'm from. We do choose a word of the year. We've been doing it since 2009. Coincidentally, I noticed there was an incredible influence of the political and economic crisis that the country has been going through for the past decade in terms of the words that were chosen. So in 2011, it was austerity. In 2012, it was troiked, which was like entroicado, which is the reflecting the heavy influence of the European consortium on deciding Portuguese politics to bail us out economically because we desperately needed it.
That is specific.
Yeah, and in 2015 we had the word geringonça, which just means contraption. Because we had a minor coalition government that was formed after the main center-left party sort of lost the elections on their own. They then formed the coalition to be able to, with lots of minority governments to run the country. So I don't think it's just a UK thing. I realize that it just the appeal of speaking to the politics of the country just happens elsewhere as well. And my favorite discovery from this was that Germany basically started choosing a word of the year since the 70s. But in the 90s, they also choose an unword of the year, which speaks to the words that are politically incorrect or socially unacceptable.
I think Word of the Year became a thing in sort of the English language in the States. This society called the American Dialect Society in 1990 wanted to drum up publicity for the organization. And so Metcalf was inspired by this, Alan Metcalf, who was the chair of it, was inspired by Times Person of the Year and decided to make a Word of the Year. And then other organizations followed suit, including Merriam-Webster and the Oxford English Dictionary.
What were the other contenders for this year, Arion?
Yeah, there were some interesting ones that didn't quite make their final selection, but among them you had Carolean, which is of or relating to the reign of Charles III, Kyiv, the new spelling, the sort of updated, accepted spelling with a Y, Kyiv, as the capital of Ukraine.
You see, that legitimately is a thing that I've been going around saying chicken Kiev until this time.
Very
now suddenly it's all Kyiv, isn't it?
Yeah, and then things like Partygate. Quiet quitting, I thought, was an interesting one that they shortlisted, not least because the word itself, that the practice of doing no more work than one is contractually obliged to do was...
I'm very familiar with it.
But it was already covered by, a phrase at least, working to rule, that we used to have. So it seemed, redundant in that sense, but also it's funny that it took hold in the way that it did, given that it sort of reinforced the idea that in not delivering up, like above and beyond what your employer wanted you to deliver, you were doing a bad job. You were effectively quitting your job. It sort of carries this very censorious connotation that I thought was unfair. But yeah, I mean, interesting word to put on the list in any case.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way as well to look back on the year, isn't it, Leaf? I mean, you can get cynical about it, as I say, as a kind of annual press release, but I think everyone publishes it because it does make you think, oh, wow, there's all these new concepts we didn't have words for as little as 12 months ago now exist.
Yeah, I mean, you can be sort of cynical about it and think it's just another promotional, exercise. But I personally really enjoy this kind of time of year when all the dictionaries start kind of flexing their muscle, because I think it's really useful to have these kind of markers of what the kind of vibe, to use a word which was mentioned on this by Collins.
Yeah, vibe shift. That was one of your stories last year, Arion. You were ahead of the curve there.
Yeah, I love that that we've got a sort of a measure of how the year has felt for lots of people. So Collins's word of the year last year was NFT. And the word of the year in 2020, surprise, surprise, was I think it was lockdown. Might have been the pandemic. It was either pandemic or lockdown. These things will go into the history books, and maybe they'll be sort of slightly, babyish history books, but they're a sort of snapshot of how the year has gone. And so I think they're useful in that way. And also without the words, we're all completely reliant on words to be able to express ourselves and give shape to feelings. And I'm basically pretty pro this, even if it does seem a bit sort of promotional.
Yeah, and I think that is a really important thing about words in general. Famously, English, it's very hard to quantify, but famously English has possibly the greatest vocabulary of any language, though, again, it's very hard to count it, but definitely it has a lot of words versus other languages. So we've got lots of words already, but I think that it is important sometimes to continue to develop new words. Obviously, every language is a live language, not least of all because of what, Leaf, you're saying. I think that having a word that captures something really neatly allows us to understand them better. And I was thinking of the new word, or the word that's come into common parlance at least, gaslighting. I think that it's maybe it's now overused, but the idea is one that really helped us put our finger on a thing that may have been happening around us or to us in a way that was really useful. And I suppose that's why I feel a bit less accepting of permacrisis, because I don't think it tells us something new. It's useful because it's funny. It's useful because it tells us something zeitgeisty about the moment. But I don't think it's going to be lasting, because it's it is just a portmanteau, as you say, of two words that we can do without that coming together of those two things and still have the concept.
And Mariana, you're a multilingualist, English, Portuguese and Japanese under your belt. Do you notice the difference? Is English particularly adept at adopting these new words and bringing them into the vocabulary? Can you see that English is particularly useful for that?
I think definitely, also because you have being a language that's so widely spoken, it just happens that it incorporates so many more feelings and sources of whatever it is that it's going on, either the developments. I feel like permacrisis was a word, to agree with Arion, that I didn't know existed, but to disagree with Arion, that I've been feeling for the last 2 years since the pandemic started. And a bit like gaslighting, I didn't have a word for it. But in contrast with Japanese, they don't have a word of the year. They have the kanji of the year, which is the Chinese characters that they use. And actually, curiously, instead of always using it, you can't invent new kanji that I know of, so you just have to keep using. But you don't have to repeat them because there's thousands of them. However, since they started doing this in 1995, the only kanji that has been repeated is the one for money or gold. And it has been used 4 times. And essentially, this becomes the kanji of the year every time they win something at the Olympics or new money is coming out. But the funniest one for me was in 2016, it was the kanji of the year because it's It has two pronunciations. One of them is kin, and kin is the beginning of the word for blonde. So kimpatsu, and guess which blonde person won the presidential elections in 2016? And so they bring, I like that they have like an international link to it, but they really can't come up with new words. So I find that a new kanji in that sense. So I find that compared to the English language, it's much more adaptive and evolving.
Well, at the risk of gaslighting you all, I am going to end it there. My thanks to Arion, Mariana, and Leaf. You can follow this Omni Shambles for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by just searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your perma podcasts and tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. That's a good deal. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.